The guitar sailed through the Dallas air like a prayer wrapped in wood and steel, and when it landed at Dimebag Darrel's feet during the third song of Pantera's set, nobody in the Starplex Amphitheatre knew they were about to witness the moment that would define why 15,000 people would leave that venue in tears. But before the security guards could reach the kid in the cheap seats who'd thrown it, before Dimebag could even pick up the battered Dean Razorback copy from the stage floor, a scream cut through the feedback and the crowd noise like a knife through silence. "My father died for you." The voice belonged to a 19-year-old kid named Tommy Richardson, standing in section 214 with empty hands and tears streaming down his face. And what happened in the next 7 minutes would become the story that roadies, venue managers, and Pantera crew members would tell for the next 3 decades. Because Dimebag Darrel didn't just stop the show. He didn't just pick up the guitar. What he did instead would reveal something about the connection between a metal god and his fans that most people never understood. The security footage from that night disappeared from the venue's archives, but 23 people recorded what happened on camcorders. And in 2024, one of those tapes finally surfaced with audio clear enough to hear every word Dimebag said into that microphone. Before we dive into the full story of that night, if you're passionate about the untold stories of rock and metal legends, hit that subscribe button. We bring you the moments that changed music history, the stories that never made it to the official biographies, and the truths that only those who were there can tell. August 14th, 1994. Pantera was 6 weeks into the Far Beyond Driven tour, riding the momentum of an album that had done the impossible by debuting at #1 on the Billboard charts, proving that the heaviest, most uncompromising metal could outsell everything else in America. The Starplex Amphitheatre in Dallas was a homecoming show, packed with 15,000 fans who'd watched Dimebag Darrel and his brother Vinnie Paul grow from local heroes into metal gods. The temperature that night was pushing 97 degrees even after sunset, and the crowd was a sea of black shirts and raised fists, bodies pressing against the barriers, voices hoarse from screaming along to Becoming and 5 Minutes Alone. Dimebag was wearing his signature Dean ML with the lightning bolt graphic, the pink goatee catching the stage lights as he carved through riffs that sounded like chainsaws cutting through concrete. This was Pantera at their absolute peak, the band that had transformed groove metal into a worldwide phenomenon. But up in section 214, in the cheap seats where the real fans sat, Tommy Richardson was holding something that weighed more than wood and metal. The Dean Razorback copy in his hands was 3 years old, scratched and dinged from practice sessions in his father's garage. The neck slightly warped from Texas humidity. Michael Richardson had bought that guitar for his son's 16th birthday, 2 months before the cancer diagnosis, and he'd made Tommy promise something in the hospital room where he'd spend his last conscious days. Michael Richardson had been a metalhead before the term existed, back when Black Sabbath was still scary and parents were forming committees to ban albums. He'd grown up in the same Oak Cliff neighborhood as the Abbott brothers, had actually seen young Darrell Abbott win a guitar contest at 17 years old with a playing style that seemed superhuman. Michael had never made it as a musician himself, had settled into a job at a machine shop, but he'd never lost the dream. When his son showed interest in guitar at 14, Michael had seen a second chance. The lessons had started in the garage behind their small house on Sunset Avenue, Michael teaching Tommy the fundamentals, showing him how to hold a pick, how to feel the rhythm in your chest before you played it with your fingers. But it was Dimebag Darrel who'd become the real teacher, through MTV videos and bootleg concert tapes, through the way his fingers moved across the fretboard like they were having a conversation with God. Michael and Tommy would sit in that garage for hours, playing along to Pantera albums, trying to nail the solo from Cemetery Gates, laughing when they got it wrong, celebrating when they got it right. When the doctors told Michael that the lung cancer had spread to his lymph nodes and his liver, that he had maybe 6 months if the chemotherapy worked, he'd made his son sit down with the Dean Razorback between them, and he'd said something that Tommy would replay in his mind 10,000 times. This guitar is yours, but it's also mine. It's every dream I had and every dream you're going to have. And I need you to promise me something, son. I need you to promise that one day, somehow, you'll let Dimebag Darrel know what his music meant to us, what it meant to me. Michael Richardson died on November 7th, 1993, 4 months before Far Beyond Driven was released, and he never got to hear the album that would have been his favorite. But he'd made Tommy promise to take that guitar to a Pantera concert and find a way to get it to Dimebag, to let the man know that his music had given a dying metalhead something to hold on to when everything else was slipping away. Tommy Richardson had tried 3 times to get backstage at previous shows, had written letters that never got answered, had waited by tour buses until security chased him away. The Starplex show was his last chance before Pantera left Texas, and he'd come with a plan that was either brilliant or insane. He'd bought the cheapest ticket in the venue, had smuggled the guitar in by convincing security it was just a prop, and he'd spent the first 2 songs working up the courage to do what he knew he had to do. The guitar sailed in a perfect arc over 12 rows of heads, over the security barrier, over the front monitors, landing with a crash that momentarily cut through even Pantera's wall of sound. Dimebag heard it before he saw it, that distinctive thunk of wood hitting stage floor, and his first instinct was to look for where the attack was coming from. But then Tommy screamed those words that would change everything. "My father died for you." And the desperation in that young voice made Dimebag stop mid-riff, made him step back from his microphone, made him hold up one hand to signal the band to bring it down, because something was happening that was bigger than the set list. The crowd noise dropped from a roar to a confused murmur as the band went silent. 15,000 people watching as Dimebag Darrel bent down and picked up the scratched, worn Dean Razorback copy, holding it under the stage lights like he was examining something sacred. When he looked up toward section 214, squinting against the spotlight glare, trying to find the kid who'd thrown it, there was something in his expression that the cameras caught, something that the people in the front rows would describe later as recognition. What Dimebag saw in that moment wasn't just a guitar or a desperate fan. What he saw was himself at 17, holding a Dean ML for the first time and knowing that he'd found the instrument that would define his life. What he saw was every garage band kid who'd learned Pantera songs note for note, trying to capture that groove metal magic. And in that scratched, beaten-up Dean Razorback that some kid had thrown from the cheap seats, Dimebag Darrel saw a story he needed to hear. "Bring him down here." Dimebag's voice through the PA system cut through the confusion, and he was pointing toward section 214, toward where Tommy Richardson stood frozen with security guards closing in. "No, don't grab him. Bring him to the stage. I want to talk to this kid." The venue security hesitated, but Dimebag was insistent, was already waving them away, was already gesturing for the kid to come down. The walk from section 214 to the stage took 90 seconds that felt like 90 hours. When Tommy reached the barrier, guards lifted him over, and then he was climbing the stairs to the stage where Pantera stood waiting, where Dimebag Darrel was holding his father's guitar like it was made of glass. "What's your name, man?" Dimebag's speaking voice was softer, with that Texas drawl that sounded like whiskey and Saturday nights. Tommy tried to answer, but his throat had closed up, the weight of 15,000 eyes on him. "It's okay. Take your time." Dimebag stepped closer, and then he did something nobody expected. He plugged the beaten-up Dean Razorback into his own rig and played a single note through it. The sound was thin and slightly out of tune, the pickups clearly worn, the electronics buzzing. But Dimebag didn't grimace. Instead, he played a few more notes, then a short riff, listening to the guitar's voice. "This guitar's been played," he said. "This guitar's been loved. Tell me about it." And Tommy Richardson finally found his voice. "My dad bought it for me 3 years ago. He taught me how to play on it. We used to sit in our garage and play along to your albums trying to get the solos right." The words tumbled out. He had lung cancer. He died last November. But before he died, he made me promise I'd get this guitar to you somehow, to let you know what your music meant to us, what it meant to him when he was sick and everything hurt. Your music gave him something to hold on to. The amphitheater had gone completely silent, 15,000 people holding their breath. Phil Anselmo was standing statue still. Vinnie Paul had come out from behind his drums. Rex Brown had set down his bass. Because everyone could feel that something profound was happening, something that transcended the usual concert dynamics. This was human to human, grief meeting empathy. Dimebag looked down at the guitar in his hands, ran his thumb across the worn frets, examined the scratches that told the story of practice sessions and a father teaching his son. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes, visible even under the harsh stage lights. "What was your dad's name?" "Michael. Michael Richardson." Dimebag nodded, and then he did something that would become the centerpiece of the story. He lifted the Dean Razorback, positioned his fingers on the frets, and he played the opening notes to Cemetery Gates. Not the polished album version, but a slower, gentler interpretation, each note held longer, each bend given more emotion. The damaged pickups gave it a raw quality, a fragility that the song didn't usually have, and when Dimebag started singing along, his voice barely a whisper through the monitors. The entire amphitheater seemed to be holding the same breath. "This is for Michael Richardson," Dimebag said when the intro finished, and then he handed the guitar back to Tommy. "Your dad made you promise to get this to me, and you did. You kept your promise. But now I need you to make me a promise." He reached behind the amplifiers and pulled out one of his own Dean ML guitars, the blue one with the lightning bolt design. "I'm giving you this, and I need you to promise me that every time you play it, every time you plug it in and make it sing, you remember that your dad's still with you. That music doesn't die when we die. It keeps going, through everyone who loved it, through everyone who keeps playing." The exchange happened in front of 15,000 witnesses, Dimebag placing his own guitar in Tommy Richardson's shaking hands, taking the worn Razorback in return, and the roar that went up from the crowd was different from usual concert screaming. This was something deeper, collective catharsis, like every person was processing their own grief through this moment. People were openly crying in the seats, in the pit. Even some security guards had turned away to wipe their eyes. But Dimebag wasn't finished. He brought Tommy to center stage, arm around the kid's shoulders, and spoke into the microphone. "This is what it's about. Not the album sales, not the Billboard charts, not any of that industry bullshit. It's about this. It's about a dad and his son in a garage, playing music together, connecting through this thing that we all love. It's about keeping those connections alive. even when the people we love are gone. What happened next wasn't planned, wasn't rehearsed. Dimebag looked at Tommy and asked, "You know how to play walk?" Tommy nodded, and Dimebag turned to Vinnie Paul. "Give him your count." And right there, in front of 15,000 people, 19-year-old Tommy Richardson played the opening riff to Walk on Dimebag Darrel's own guitar, through Dimebag's own rig, standing next to Dimebag on stage. He didn't play it perfectly. His fingers fumbled on the first chord change. His timing was slightly off. But none of that mattered because Dimebag was right there beside him, playing the harmony parts on Tommy's father's guitar, making the worn-out Razorback sing in ways it had never sung before. When Phil Anselmo came in with the vocals, when Vinnie Paul locked into the rhythm, when Rex Brown added the bass line, it became more than just a performance. It became a communion, a 15,000-person church of metalheads, witnessing pure connection. The song lasted 4 minutes, but those 4 minutes contained everything that metal music was supposed to be about. Power and vulnerability, strength and emotion, technical skill and raw human feeling. When it ended, when the final chord rang out and faded into the hot Dallas night, Dimebag hugged Tommy Richardson like he was family. "Your dad would be proud of you," he whispered, just loud enough for the front row cameras to catch. "You kept your promise. Now keep the other one. Keep playing. Keep the music alive." Tommy walked off stage with Dimebag's Dean ML clutched against his chest, tears streaming but a smile breaking through, and the standing ovation lasted so long that the band had to wait 3 minutes before starting the next song. Something had shifted in the energy, something everyone present could feel. The rest of the set was played with an intensity that drew from that emotional moment, every song sounding somehow more vital. What nobody in the audience knew was what Dimebag did with Tommy's father's guitar after the show. The crew members who were there saw Dimebag spend an hour carefully restringing the Razorback, adjusting the action, cleaning the fretboard with the same attention he gave his own custom instruments. He had the pickups replaced with top-of-the-line DiMarzios, had the electronics rewired by his personal guitar tech, had every scratch cataloged, because he said those were part of the guitar's story and shouldn't be buffed away. For years after that night, Dimebag Darrel carried that Dean Razorback on tour. He didn't play it in the main sets, didn't feature it in photo shoots, but before every show, in the privacy of the dressing room or tour bus, he would pick it up and play Cemetery Gates as a warm-up. The crew members knew to give him space during those moments, knew that something about that scratched, repaired guitar connected to something deep in Dimebag's understanding of why music mattered. Tommy Richardson still teaches guitar in Fort Worth, Texas. The Dean ML that Dimebag gave him hangs on his studio wall, though he takes it down every August 14th, the anniversary of that night, and plays it for his students. He tells them the story, every detail, every emotion, and he makes them understand something that's getting lost in the modern music industry. He makes them understand that music isn't about streaming numbers or social media followers or viral moments. It's about a father and son in a garage, learning to play together. It's about a dying man finding comfort in the sound of a guitar. It's about a metal god stopping a concert for a grieving kid, because he understood that sometimes music is the only thing that can carry us through the worst moments of our lives. 15,000 people were at the Starplex Amphitheatre that night in August 1994, and every single one of them carries the memory of what they witnessed. Some recorded it on camcorders, some captured fragments on disposable cameras, some just held it in their hearts and told the story to anyone who would listen. because it was the kind of moment that reminds us why we fall in love with music in the first place, why we drive hours to see concerts, why we spend money we don't have on albums and guitars and tickets. That's the truth that Dimebag Darrel understood better than most. The truth that made him stop a concert for a kid with a story and a guitar. The truth that made him honor a stranger's dying wish. The truth that music doesn't belong to the people who make it famous. It belongs to everyone who needs it, everyone who finds in it a reason to keep going, everyone who discovers that sometimes the greatest gift you can give isn't money or fame or success, but simply the acknowledgement that their story matters, that their love matters, that the music they made with someone they've lost will echo forever. That night at the Starplex Amphitheatre, 15,000 people learned that truth together, and they carried it with them when they left, carried it through the decades that followed. They carried it because in that moment, when a guitar flew through the air and landed at a metal god's feet, when a 19-year-old kept his promise to his dead father, when Dimebag Darrel chose empathy over spectacle and connection over showmanship, something shifted in what concert experiences could be. Something proved that the distance between stage and audience, between famous and unknown, between living and dead, is smaller than we think. And that's why they cried. Not just because it was sad, though it was. Not just because it was beautiful, though it was that too. They cried because Dimebag Darrel showed them something they needed to see. That in a world that often feels cold and disconnected, music can still be the thing that brings us together, that honors our dead, that proves our love isn't wasted. That when we play a guitar our Father gave us, when we throw it across an amphitheater in a desperate act of faith, when someone catches it and understands exactly what it means, we're participating in something ancient and sacred and utterly human. The story lives on, and every time someone tells it, every time a music teacher in Fort Worth takes down a Dean ML and explains to wide-eyed students what happened that August night, every time someone watches those grainy camcorder videos and sees Dimebags, tears catching the stage lights, the promise gets kept again. The music doesn't die. The love doesn't fade. And somewhere, maybe Michael Richardson knows that his son kept his word, that his guitar made it to Dimebag Darrel, that his dream of connection through music came true in ways he never could have imagined. That's what 15,000 people witnessed. That's what made them cry. And that's what makes the story worth telling decades later in a world that desperately needs to remember that music, at its best, is still capable of miracles.